Am I the a-hole for telling my stepmom I'm not her actual child after years of favoritism? I am posting this here because I am currently sitting in my room, listening to the absolute dead silence vibrating through my house, and I need to know if I am completely blind to my own actions. Part of me feels 100% justified, but there is this tiny, persistent voice of regret in the back of my mind making me second-guess everything. To give you some background info, I am a 19-year-old female. When I was 15, my stepbrother Jake, who is now 17, began living with us full-time. Before he moved in, our household consisted of me, my older sister, who is currently 20, my dad, who is 44, and my stepmom, who is 42. For the sake of absolute clarity in this post, I am referring to her as my stepmom, but the reality is that she is the only mom I have ever known. She came into my life when I was very little, and I have called her mom for as long as I can remember. She packed my lunches, comforted me when I was sick, and raised me alongside my dad and my older sister. We were a completely normal, tight-knit family unit. Then Jake moved in. When Jake first arrived, things started out just meh. He was quiet, kept to himself, and we were all just trying to adjust to having a new person in the house. But after a few months went by, his presence became incredibly annoying and draining. He developed this deeply aggressive streak and always carried a really nasty attitude. In the beginning, that hostility was mostly directed toward my parents, but it still completely sucked to live around it. You could feel the tension the second you walked through the front door. The atmosphere in the house shifted from warm and welcoming to completely hostile. The real issue started because my parents never actually punished him for his behavior. Whenever he slammed doors, yelled at my stepmom, or completely ignored my dad, they would just sigh, make excuses for him, and talk about how he was going through a hard transition phase. Because there were absolutely no consequences, surprise, surprise, his behavior worsened significantly over the next few years. By the time he was 15 and 16, he began stealing money from around the house, drinking heavily and getting high. He became an absolute nightmare at school. It felt like my parents' phones were constantly ringing with calls from the administration. He was getting suspended, cutting classes, and getting into fights. My parents were always being called away from work or away from family dinners to go pick him up from the police station or the principal's office because he always managed to get into some kind of severe trouble. Because of Jake's constant downward spiral and his non-stop destructive behavior, my sister and I completely became last-minute thoughts. It happened so gradually that we didn't even realize it at first, but suddenly, my parents barely ever talked to us or about us. Our achievements, our school events, our lives, they all just faded into the background. Every single conversation at the dinner table was entirely consumed by Jake. It was always Jake this and Jake that. Did Jake go to class today? Is Jake eating enough? We need to be gentle with Jake because he's dealing with a lot. My sister and I would sit there in complete silence, realizing that as long as we were doing everything right, we were practically invisible. We had to navigate our high school years, our college applications, and our personal struggles completely by ourselves because my parents simply didn't have the emotional bandwidth left for us. Now, despite his behavior, I want to clarify that Jake isn't all that bad of a person at his core. We hardly talk to each other, and we definitely aren't close. But when he isn't actively spiraling, he's actually nice to me and my sister. He never directs his rage at us. He only fights with my parents, and to be fair, he has actually helped me out a few times when I needed a ride or needed someone to look out for me. My problem isn't with him necessarily. I don't hate my stepbrother. My problem is entirely with the way he acts out and how my parents completely prioritize and baby him, destroying the balance of our entire family while holding him to a completely different standard than my sister and me. That brings me to the actual incident, which boiled over last night. Jake had a hockey game, and he ended up losing it. When he came home afterward, he walked through the front door absolutely pissed off. He was throwing his gear on the floor, kicking the baseboards, and cursing under his breath. My stepmom, trying to be the peacemaker as usual, approached him gently in the hallway and asked him to just relax and take a deep breath. Jake turned around, looked her dead in the eye, and told her to fuck off. Then he turned on his heel, walked right out of the house, and slammed the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. My stepmom just stood there, looking incredibly hurt, but she didn't say a word. She didn't call him back, she didn't text him, and she didn't give him a curfew. Hours went by. Later that night, Jake finally came home again. But this time, it was incredibly obvious that he was completely high. He was slurring his words. His eyes were bloodshot and glassy, and he could barely keep his balance as he stumbled through the living room. Instead of raising her voice, Instead of telling him there would be consequences, and instead of taking away his phone or grounding him, my stepmom just let him sleep. She literally helped him navigate toward the stairs, guided him, and even kissed him goodnight on the forehead before he crawled into bed. Watching this happen right in front of me completely pissed me off. A dam broke inside of me, and all the years of resentment, of being ignored, and of watching him get away with literal crimes just flooded out. I stood in the hallway, waiting for her to walk away from his bedroom door. When she turned around, I confronted her right there. I looked at her and told her that when I came home slightly drunk once when I was in high school, she completely lost her mind and grounded me for 2 freaking weeks. I wasn't driving, I wasn't high, I wasn't aggressive, and I didn't tell her to fuck off. I just made a stupid, one-time teenage mistake, and she treated me like a criminal. Yet, her biological son can disrespect her, abuse substances, steal, and act like a monster, and she rewards him with a kiss on the forehead. My stepmom looked incredibly exhausted and stressed. She put her hands up and told me that now was really not the time to have this conversation, and that she was too tired to deal with it. But I was completely done staying quiet. I told her straight to her face that she has some serious, deeply ingrained double standards. I looked at her and said that I get that he's her actual son and I'm not her actual child, but this was all so completely unfair to me and my sister. The second those words left my mouth, the entire atmosphere in the hallway changed. My stepmom completely froze. Her face went pale, and her eyes welled up with tears. She looked at me with this expression of pure heartbreak that made my stomach drop. She told me, her voice shaking, that the actual child comment was completely uncalled for. She reminded me that she had raised me for most of my life, that she had loved me as her own, and that she deserved much better than for me to throw a lack of blood relation in her face over an argument about Jake. My dad, who had been sitting in the adjacent room listening to the entire exchange, walked out into the hallway at that point. He looked furious. He stepped between us, looked at me, and told me in a very stern, low voice not to be rude to my mother. I was so overwhelmed with anger, adrenaline, and frustration that I didn't want to hear any of it. I completely ignored his warning, turned my back on both of them, and went straight to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night staring at my ceiling, my heart pounding, feeling a massive mix of righteous anger and a sickening twist of guilt. This all happened last night, and the fallout today has been incredibly weird and tense. When I came downstairs to get food, my stepmom was in the kitchen. To my absolute surprise, she is acting like everything is completely fine. She offered to make me breakfast, spoke to me in her normal voice, and is completely sweeping the entire screaming match under the rug, which is her typical way of handling deep emotional conflict. But my dad is a completely different story. He is actively giving me the absolute silent treatment. He won't look at me, he won't pass me the salt, and he completely ignores me when I walk into a room. Eventually, I got so tired of the heavy tension that I confronted my dad in the living room while my stepmom was upstairs. I asked him flat out if he was seriously being serious right now with the silent treatment. He finally looked at me, his expression completely cold and disappointed. He told me that I was absolutely not allowed to say those kinds of hurtful things in this house. He said that my stepmom was deeply, profoundly upset by what I said, even if she was trying to put on a brave face, and that I needed to go upstairs right now and give her a genuine apology. I looked at him, thought about all the times my sister and I were pushed aside for Jake, and I refused. As I sit here writing this out, I am still very confident that I am not the asshole when it comes to the core of the issue. The double standards in this house are real. They are toxic, and they are actively destroying my parents' relationship with their daughters. Jake is babied and shielded from the consequences of his own terrible actions, while I was held to an incredibly strict, unforgiving standard. It is completely unfair, and someone needed to say it out loud. However, now that the adrenaline has completely faded and the house is dead quiet, I do feel a little regretful about explicitly mentioning our blood relation. No matter how angry I am about Jake, say what you will about the situation, but she did raise me after all. She has been my mom in every practical sense of the word, and using her status as a stepmother as a weapon to hurt her feels like a low blow, even if I was coming from a place of deep pain and neglect. My dad thinks I am completely in the wrong for crossing that specific line. My stepmom is quietly bleeding out emotionally while trying to pretend everything is normal, and I am stuck in the middle of my own convictions and my guilt. So, am I the asshole? Update. So 2 weeks ago I made a post on here asking if I was out of line. Many of you said I wasn't and that my parents were in the wrong. I read a lot more of the comments than I expected to, and while some of them were pretty harsh, a lot of people pointed out things I had been ignoring for a long time. I think I got used to this situation in our house because it had been going on for years. Jake causing chaos became normal. My parents dropping everything for him became normal, and my sister and I quietly dealing with our own lives without much attention also became normal. A few days after I made the post, my dad asked if we could talk. I honestly expected another lecture about how I hurt my stepmom's feelings, but that is not what happened at all. My stepmom was there too, and before I could even really say much, both of them apologized to me. Not one of those half apologies where parents say they are sorry you feel hurt. They actually admitted they handled things badly. My dad said he knew things in the house had become unbalanced for a long time and that he should have stepped in sooner instead of constantly focusing on keeping the peace with Jake. My stepmom admitted she became so focused on Jake's issues that she stopped noticing how absent she had become from my sisters and my lives. She got emotional talking about it and said hearing me say I was not her actual child genuinely devastated her because it made her realize she had spent years accidentally making me feel exactly that way. That conversation lasted a few hours. There was a lot that came up that had clearly been building for years. My sister joined partway through and admitted she felt the same way I did but had mostly given up trying to say anything because every discussion somehow circled back to Jake and his problems. She pointed out that the whole family operated around his moods. If he had a bad day, everybody else's plans changed too. My parents did not argue with any of it. My stepmom admitted that when Jake first moved in, she felt enormous pressure to fix everything immediately. She thought if she gave him enough patience, support, and understanding, he would settle down quickly and finally feel safe. Instead, every time he acted out, she pulled back harder on discipline because she was terrified of pushing him away. I also learned a lot more about Jake's childhood than I knew before. My stepmom had him when she was very young and not in a stable situation at all. She said she loved him, but at the time she honestly believed living with his father would give him a safer and more secure life. His father was older, financially stable, and seemed responsible. Apparently, that image did not last very long once Jake was actually living with him. Without getting into details that are not mine to share, Jake grew up in a really unhealthy environment. There was constant instability, a lot of anger, and apparently discipline in that house swung between being almost non-existent and suddenly extreme. My stepmom found out about a lot of it much later than she should have. By the time Jake came to live with us, he already had years' worth of issues bottled up. I should also mention that Jake was the result of a one-night stand. My stepmom did not know the man was married until after the fact. From what she explained, that entire situation became messy very quickly, and there was a lot of guilt surrounding how everything happened and how Jake grew up afterward. None of this excuses his behavior, and my parents were very clear about that too. My dad admitted they went too far in the opposite direction by avoiding consequences completely. He said they became so focused on understanding why Jake behaved the way he did that they stopped actually parenting him properly. Looking back, it honestly explains a lot. Jake's anger was never random. He has always been weirdly suspicious of adults, especially authority figures. Teachers, coaches, principals, parents, even other relatives. If somebody tried to enforce rules, he pushed back immediately. It was like he automatically assumed every adult was either lying to him or waiting to hurt him somehow. My stepmom explained it better than I can. She said Jake is constantly testing people to see when they finally stop loving him or give up on him. Every time he steals, drinks, starts fights, or mouths off, he is basically waiting for confirmation that he was right not to trust anyone in the first place. Apparently, his therapist had explained something similar before Jake stopped going. A lot of people asked why he quit therapy. From what my parents told me, the therapist he had been seeing moved practices and Jake completely shut down afterward. They tried a new therapist, but he refused to engage at all and eventually stopped attending sessions. My parents are actively looking again, but it has been difficult finding someone he is willing to even speak to. Things at home have been quieter lately though. Not magically fixed quieter, just less tense. My dad has actually started holding Jake accountable for smaller things instead of ignoring everything until it explodes. My stepmom still struggles with it sometimes, but I can tell she is trying. My sister and I have also been making more of an effort to actually spend time with them again instead of staying in our rooms or out with friends all day. One thing I was not expecting was Jake avoiding me after the argument. At first I thought I was imagining it, but after a few days it became obvious. If I walked into the kitchen, he would suddenly leave. If we were in the living room together, he would find an excuse to go upstairs. He barely looked at me. I have no idea how much of the original fight he overheard, but I am pretty sure he heard enough to understand that he was part of the reason it happened. Yesterday, I finally cornered him long enough to talk. It was awkward, honestly. Jake is not exactly the type to sit down and have heartfelt conversations. I asked him straight up if he was mad at me. He shrugged and said no. I asked if he overheard what happened that night, and he admitted he did. He looked uncomfortable the entire time we talked. Not angry, just uncomfortable. I told him I never hated him and that my issue was mostly with how everything in the house revolved around him. I also told him that constantly expecting people to turn on him was probably exhausting. He did not really respond to that, but he stopped looking like he wanted to bolt from the room. At one point, I told him he does not have to be so scared all the time and that my parents are not his dad. He went really quiet after that. The conversation did not suddenly transform us into best friends or anything dramatic like that. Jake is still Jake. He still acts detached half the time and sarcastic the other half. But he has stopped avoiding me, which honestly feels like progress considering where things were a couple weeks ago. My stepmom has also been making more effort with my sister and me. The other night she asked if we wanted to go out for dinner with just her. No Jake, no family crisis attached. It sounds small, but it had been a long time since something like that happened naturally. I do not think everything is magically healed now. There is still a lot to work through, especially for Jake. I also do not think years of resentment disappear after one emotional conversation at the dining room table. Still, things feel more honest now than they have in a long time. Anyways, that's that. I just wanted to thank you guys for showing me so much support when I felt so alone. This sounds cheesy, but I mean it. Thanks.